Hi folks, Matt Easton here. So I've made a video previously talking about certain types of Indian sword and specifically looking at the issue of extensions on the end of pommels on Indian swords. Now if I just grab a kind of, there we go, a kind of average-ish tulwar. The most frequently found and probably the most famous type of Indian sword is the tulwar. The tulwar has a sabre blade, usually short-ish, they're usually about 30 inches long, which is relatively short for European swords, at least in this period. Okay, and I should mention very often these sabre blades on tulwars are actually European made, so whilst they are Indian swords, very much Indian in their look, the blades were often actually made in usually Germany and exported to India. But equally lots of them are native made, Indian made blades. And lots of people note that on tulwars you have a little knob on the end. Sometimes that takes the form of a spike. I've got a few tulwars around the floor actually at the moment, but I can't see one which has a spike on it. But some of them take the form of a spike and some of them take the form of what looks like a little hook. And there's been much debate over the years what this thing is for, and there are suggestions it's there for pommeling more effectively, which I don't know, I'm sort of a bit dubious about that, because if you're going to make them, if it's going to be there for pommeling more effectively, why not make it pointy, and why are some of them really curved rather than just sticking out like all of those do? Some of them curve around, that wouldn't make sense particularly to hit someone with. Other suggestions, something to do with hanging stuff off, other suggestions to sort of grip in some way, that was something to do with the way you hold the sword. Well, one of the theories, at least with the long ones, is that they were to enable a two-handed grip. Now, I have recently, as you will notice, I'm holding a sword here that I haven't shown before in video. That's because I only took receipt of it today. And recently I've obtained a few of these basket-hilted Indian swords. And this type of hilt, if I just put it near the camera there, this type of hilt is known variously as an Indian basket, or a Hindu basket in fact, sometimes. And you'll notice it has a characteristic sort of large plate protecting the main part of the hand, with this very characteristic V-shape. They're pretty much always that V-shape, and they kind of have to be if you're going to jam your hand in tightly in there, because of the way that the thumb goes. You'll notice, just try not to hit my light there, you'll notice that the thumb goes up, so it has to be kind of that shape to accommodate a really tight grip. And Indian swords do very often have these very tight grips. So the Indian basket hilt was popular in the 17th and 18th centuries, and it was still in use in the 19th centuries, although it was kind of old-fashioned by that point and kind of phased out of use gradually. However, I have found photographs from around the time of the Indian Mutiny, which is 1857, that do show this type of hilt still in use. Probably, you know, great-grandfather's sword handed down. They were probably old swords by that point. But you'll notice it creates a lot of surface for decoration. And you know what? These are really good handguard. I mean, it's as good as any European sabre or cutlass. It gives the same kind of coverage, same kind of protection as a cutlass does. But it's more confined than a European sword grip is generally. So we've talked a lot about the large round pommels on lots of types of Indian sword. This is not, if I grab a tulwar, different tulwar this time, you'll notice that the tulwar pommels often are quite flat. The ones on these basket hilts tend to be quite thick, or indeed sometimes domed. Let's just grab, you can guess that I've got lots of swords in this room and I'm stepping all around them. Here is another example, and you'll see the pommel on that is domed. Okay, so this one is kind of flat-ish, but it's kind of got angled sides, and this one is actually like a semi-sphere basically. And you'll notice both of these basket hilts have this stalk sticking out of the pommel. Now, one thing that I was not sure about before owning these was how strong that stalk is. Well, I can now confirm it's pretty strong. This one here that I'm holding in my right hand, I'll just put the other one down for a second. This one, I don't know whether it ever had an end knob like the other one did, but it doesn't have one now. There's no signs of there ever having been one actually. But if you look in the end, you probably, there we go, I think we can just see it in the light there. you can see that little stalk, it looks like, inside this tube. So this is a tube of iron coming out of the pommel. That stalk there is the end of the tang. Okay, so if you look at this saber blade, this is a big saber blade. It's 35.5-inch blade to the hand. So it's a big saber blade. It's as long as some kind of short long swords actually. So you've got a big saber blade, and it's got a long two-handed length tang essentially that goes all the way to there. Now, this has changed my views slightly, because actually if you look at the length of this stalk, look at that. It's perfectly the same length as the space for your hand in here. So the space in the hilt here is 1 hand width, and the space on the stalk here is 1 hand width. So I'm now, I have to say, fairly convinced that in actual fact, although they are not shown in art that I have so far seen being gripped two-handed, I think they must have originally been like this to be gripped two-handed. It seems obvious, but there are lots of reasons why I had previously been dubious about the fact that they were there to be two-handed. I'd always been told that they were a hollow tube. I now see that it is a hollow tube, but inside the hollow tube is a tang. So actually it's essentially like a grip. You could say a grip on a sword is also a hollow tube, but it's around the tang. So it's much more substantial than I realised. And also, holding it two-handed, you suddenly end up with a two-handed sabre, and that's right, it kind of combines the best of all worlds. People go, oh, why didn't they have basket hilts on longswords? Well, here you've got something that's essentially a longsword, but curved sabre blade, with a basket hilt guard, with the ability to grip it with your left hand sometimes as well. And I should mention, I mentioned artwork there, looking at historical artwork from India, from the end of the mostly the end of the 17th century and through the 18th century, when these things are shown, they are usually shown with a shield on the other hand. So generally speaking, they are a one-handed sword. That's why the basket only protects your dominant hand. So you'd have a shield on one hand, or a dal as it's called. There's various types of shields actually. Dal is one type, but a shield on one either in your hand or on your arm, and one of these in your other hand. And presumably sometimes, if you want to, you can put your left hand up to it to give a particularly powerful strike, or even a particularly powerful parry if someone's swinging, you know, a fairly weighty weapon at you. So that has really, owning these has really changed my opinion slightly on what they're for, and I do think that probably predominantly, and again you'll notice that's hand width, completely different sword, probably slightly different period, completely different type of blade. This isn't a saber blade, this is more what's called a, I think it's a Susan Pata blade, with the flares at the tip with a kind of clipped back point, straight, entirely straight, and you'll notice that also has the same length pretty much, stalk, long enough for the hand. So that owning these has really changed my view of what they were probably for, and I think they probably were for gripping two-handed. Could you hit someone with this? Yeah, of course you could, but you could also hit them with the pommel. I don't think, generally speaking, these usually have a knob on the end or just nothing on the end, so I don't think that they're particularly offensive. I don't think their primary purpose is to hit people. You can hit people with the basket hilt, you can hit people with the pommel. If you're hitting someone in the face with the hilt, some part of the hilt, you're not going to, generally speaking, you're not going to kill them, you're just going to concuss them or hurt them, or create an opening such that you can use the blade, you know, the edge or the point on them. So really, I would say, I wouldn't say that that is for hitting people, generally speaking, because you can hit someone just with a pommel just fine, or just a small spike. You don't need this great long stalk. So there we go. To cut a long story short, I'm now completely convinced that these are for gripping the sword two-handed sometimes. But, and once more I'll reiterate, they're almost always shown in art, and so far I haven't found an example otherwise, being used one-handed as one-handed swords. They are predominantly one-handed swords. Very often this type of basket hilt in the 18th century, again I'll reiterate, has a European blade made, European-made blade. This example is an Indian-made blade. The big curved one is a European blade. So there we go. I'll be talking a little bit more about Indian swords in upcoming videos. Cheers!